In this video, we'll show you how to replace the variable valve timing solenoid on your Ford F-150. This is located on top of the engine and under the valve cover. Let's get started. We need to relieve the fuel pressure from the system. To do that, we've raised and supported the vehicle, and we're back underneath the spare tire. Up on the frame, we have the fuel pump control module connector. We can unplug that. Now that it's stalled out and won't start again, we know that we've depressurized the fuel system. We'll remove the negative terminal using an 8mm. Just loosen that up. Give the terminal a wiggle. We'll pop that off and set it to the side. It's good to place a rag over the terminal. Make sure that the negative cable can't make contact. We need to remove the engine cover. To do that, we'll go ahead and remove the oil cap. Pull up on the engine cover. Pull towards the front of the vehicle. We can set that off to the side and reinstall the oil cap. Now we can remove the insulator covering our fuel pump. Here we have our high pressure fuel pump. We can see we have a hard line coming out of it this way that comes down, and we have a bracket with an 8mm nut. We'll go ahead and remove that. We have another 8mm bolt towards the front of the engine from that, holding another bracket. Go ahead and remove that as well. Now we can go ahead and loosen up the flare nut, holding on the high pressure line. I'm going to wrap a rag around here just to catch any residual fuel that may come out. To loosen the flare nut, we'll use a 17mm wrench. Now we can release our quick disconnect. We have a small tab right here. You can press down on that, just like an electrical connector. Pick up on that. And then we can go ahead and turn that around. As you can see, that goes down. Pinch in one side and push up. Turn it the other way, pinch in the other side. Pull that up, and you should be able to pop off the line. Now that we have the lines disconnected, we can go ahead and remove the bolts holding the pump in. Removing these bolts, you want to only turn them one turn at a time each, going back and forth to slowly bring this up. With the bolts removed, we can pull the pump out, and that'll give us access to the bottom part of the electrical connector. We press in on the tab, pull that out. You always want to check your terminals for any corrosion or damage. These look okay. Now, it's not completely necessary to remove the Y-pipe here, but I find that you get a lot more working room if you do. We have 3 8mm hose clamps. We'll go ahead and loosen each of those up, and we can remove this. We can set this off to the side. Looking down the driver's side of the engine, we find the intercooler piping coming off the turbocharger. We have another 8mm clamp. We can go ahead and loosen that up. Right up in front of the engine, we have a little plastic clamp that goes around the intercooler pipe. Go ahead and just pull back on that and release it. We can go ahead and pull up on the intercooler pipe and pop it out of the grommet. We don't need to fully remove this, just get enough space to remove the valve cover. To give us a little more room in this area, I'm going to go ahead and remove this 8mm holding the bracket for some of our breather lines here. There's a small tab on the back side for this breather line. Push towards the back of the vehicle. You simply pull up on that. You can push the tab towards the front just like that. And we can get this vacuum hose off. I'm just going to use a little fork pry tool. You can certainly use a flathead screwdriver. Remove the breather hose from the manifold here. Just pinch in on these two tabs. We can push down on the white portion of the connector. Get that slit down. Pop that off. Next we have a bit of the wiring harness. You can just pull that up right off the stud. Our electrical connectors for our VCT solenoids. Each of them has a small pink tab. We can pick up on the tab. Once you've pulled up on the tab, go ahead and press in and remove the connector. We'll do the same on the other one. Pull up on the tab, and press in. Make sure you check your terminals for any damage or corrosion. These look good. To remove the hose going to the wastegate, we can simply grab onto the rubber portion and pull it off the wastegate. We'll set that off to the side. We have a few more clips holding the VCT solenoid's wiring harness to the valve cover. And go ahead and pry those off as well. Working our way back along the valve cover. There are some studs sticking out of the head, and the nuts holding the valve cover on are on top of those. And on top of those we have a small clip. Just pry up on each of those clips. We'll keep working our way towards the back of the valve cover, pulling the wiring harness off. And go ahead and pull the O2 sensor wire off of the wiring harness. And work our way towards the back of the valve cover. We have two small clips on a couple more of the valve cover studs. Pull those off and get this portion of the wiring harness freed up. We need to remove our coil packs. In order to do that, we have an electrical connector on each one with a red tab. We're just simply going to push out on the red tab, and then we can push down on the gray tab in the connector. As you unplug each of these, you want to make sure that your terminals aren't corroded or damaged, and we can do the same on each coil pack. There's an 8mm bolt on each of the coil packs holding them onto the valve cover. You can go ahead and remove each of those. Now we can go ahead and remove our coil packs. We have one stud coming off the valve cover in the center here. Holding our fuel rail on is a small nut. We can go ahead and remove that with an 8mm. Following our fuel line up, we have another 8mm right here. We can go ahead and remove that. For the hard fuel line here, simply rotate this bracket up and get it out of the way. And that should give us enough room. We can remove our dipstick. On the far front driver's side, we have a stud sticking up from the valve cover. There's a small nut on this, helping to hold this bracket on over here. We'll go ahead and remove that with an 8mm. Looking down on the front of the engine, in front of the driver's valve cover, we have a 15mm nut on a stud holding the rest of this bracket on. Pop the lower intake tube out of the grommet, and then you can set the bracket off to the side. Now we can remove the 11 10mm nuts holding the valve cover on. Now that we have all of the hardware loose, we can go ahead and start prying up on the edge of the valve cover. I'm going to come in and pry up on the inner edge on the front portion of the valve cover. You want to be very careful while doing this because the valve cover is plastic and you don't want to damage the gasket underneath as well. I'm going to be using a small pry bar, and then I'm going to use another screwdriver underneath that to help myself pry up just a little bit. And start to get that freed up. In our case, our valve cover gasket stayed behind with the head. I'm just going to pull that off and give it a quick inspection. Before we can remove our solenoid, we're going to put a rag underneath them. That way you don't drop the bolt down into the timing cover. If you did that, you would have to remove the timing cover to get it. Now we can remove the bolt holding our solenoid in with an 8mm. We can go ahead and remove our solenoid. We'll give this a quick inspection and set it off to the side. I'm just going to give this a quick wipe down. We don't want to use any solvents or any brake cleaner inside the engine here. Go ahead and install our solenoid. You want to be very careful when installing this. Line up your bolt hole. Get that started in. We'll get that snug down. We can torque this to 71 inch-pounds. After we've torqued it to 71 inch-pounds, we're going to go ahead and do an additional 20 degrees. Make sure to remove the rag. With these valve covers, we need to put a little bit of gasket maker up here at the top at the split between the head and the timing cover, and then down here at the bottom between the head and the timing cover. I'm going to use a gasket scraper to scrape these off. You can use a flat razor blade, but you want to be very careful not to scratch any of the surfaces. I'm going to use a rag just underneath it here to try to keep as much of it from falling down into the timing case as possible. We'll go ahead and scrape that off. As you scrape this other one, you want to try to keep as much out of the spaces below it as possible. Not much gasket maker on there. Doesn't take too much to get off. Now we can scrape off the lower portion. Pull this rag out in an upwards motion. That way, if anything did fall down onto the rag, we don't drop it in. Got a big chunk of gasket maker down here at the bottom. I'm just going to pull that off. Now that we've scraped off just about all the gasket maker that we can, I'm going to spray a little bit of brake cleaner on a rag here and then wipe down the surfaces. Now that we've cleaned up those two spots, I'm going to use the rag and brake clean on the rest of the valve cover mating surface to clean that up. Good to wipe away from the inside of the head. That way you're not knocking any of the debris down into the engine. Before we can install our valve cover, we need to inspect each of the grommets in the valve cover. We have 2 up front for our solenoids, and then 3 in the back for our spark plug tubes. Inspect each grommet, give it a wipe down, and make sure it's not nicked. If your valve cover gasket came off while you were removing the valve cover, we're going to go ahead and put that back in. You want to give this a little wipe down before you install it as well. Make sure that it doesn't have any cracks or is damaged in any way. If it is, you want to replace this. Before we can install our valve cover, we need to apply a small amount of RTV to 2 spots. One on the inboard side here between the timing cover and the head, and the other on the outboard side between the timing cover and the head. You don't need much. Just a small dab right over the seam. When installing your valve cover, you want to be very careful not to damage anything. Take your time and make sure you get everything out of the way as you work it in. We'll get it in place, and then as you set it down, you want to pay attention to each of your grommets and make sure that they're not getting folded over or damaged in any way. With the valve cover in place, we can start installing all of our hardware. For right now, you can just work your way around, threading in all the studs. Just finger tight for right now, and then we'll tighten them down in the correct order. And we can torque these to 89 inch-pounds using the procedure shown. Install the coil packs. We'll slide these down, make sure they're fully seated. We can just snug that up. Doesn't need to be too tight, just needs to hold the coil pack down. And we can do the same on the other two. With the bracket lined up, we can install our two nuts onto their studs. One small one up top and the bigger one down bottom. We can just snug those up, they don't need to be too tight. With the bracket on, you can move both of the intercooler intake pieces back into their grommets. And start lining up your wiring harness. And down below that, we can feed the intercooler pipe back onto the turbo. Working from the back side of the engine, we can go ahead and start getting each of the clips holding the wiring harness back on to their studs. Then we can plug in the coil packs. Make sure you press down on the red tab to lock it in. Working towards the front, we can go ahead and plug in our solenoids, and we'll press down on the tab on that one as well to lock it in. We'll get this breather hose back attached to the valve cover. It's a quick connect, so you can simply press down. Just make sure that it's not going to pop back off. Continuing down, we have our hose clamp. Just give that a tighten. You want to be careful with hose clamps. You don't want to over tighten them because you can easily strip them out. We'll get our turbo wastegate line back installed. Simply slide that on. Make sure you get it all the way down. And reinstall your clip. Reinstall the dipstick. And pop our vacuum line back on to the intake manifold. Once that's on, press up on the white tab on the bottom. Make sure that's set all the way in and not going to pull back off. We get this bracket line back up. Get the hardware installed. The small tab on the back side, you can line that up and then snug that down. You can get the Y pipe for our intake lined up. Get all three ends of the hose seated fully down. And now we can tighten all three of the hose clamps. Those don't need to be too tight, just enough that they won't pull off. Our high fuel pressure pump is actuated by the camshaft. That means we need to turn the motor over in order to get the camshaft to sit at the lowest point so we can install our fuel pump. We have the vehicle raised and supported. I'm using an 18mm with a long extension on my 1/2-inch ratchet. And we're just going to turn the engine over until we see the lobe go down to the lowest point. Sometimes it'll be a little hard to turn. That's when it's hitting compression. You'll feel it free up and turn a little easier. So that should be bottom right there. You can go ahead and remove the rag. Get our pump lined up. If either of your lines are in the way, just move that out of the way. Now we can install our hardware. We'll get both of these snugged down. You want to bring them down together. You don't want to tighten one down before the other. Just lightly bring each one down. Now we can torque these to 15 foot-pounds. Go ahead and get the quick disconnect hose on. Push the blue tab down. Make sure both sides lock into place and then lock the bottom piece into the other side. Make sure that can't pull off. And once that's on, we can thread on our high pressure hose. I'll tighten down our high pressure hose. You want to be cautious not to over tighten this, but you do want it to be tight since you don't want this to leak fuel. And with both the lines on, we can plug in our electrical connector. Make sure that's seated all the way down and is not going to pull back out. Now we can get the hardware for our high pressure line in. Same as the other hardware, I'm going to get both of these started in and then we can tighten them down. These two bracket bolts don't need to be very tight, so be cautious when tightening them down. Now we can install the fuel pump insulator. And we can reinstall the engine cover. We'll remove the oil cap. There's two tabs towards the back of the engine. Slide the grommets of the engine cover into that and set it down around where the oil cap goes. Make sure to reinstall your oil cap. Now we can go ahead and plug the connector back in for the fuel pump module. Make sure that's fully seated and doesn't want to pull back out. Install our negative terminal. We can snug that down with an 8mm. This doesn't need to be too tight, just enough that it won't move. With the fuel pump module plugged back in, we can go ahead and cycle the key a few times to prime the fuel pumps. We'll wait 3 to 5 seconds. And we'll cycle the key again. We'll do this 3 or 4 times. And then you can go ahead and try and start the engine. If the engine won't start or starts and stalls out, repeat the process of priming the engine by cycling the key. Take the vehicle for a test drive and make sure everything seems okay.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.